Okay, right. Thank you very much,
Great.
Charlie.
Thank you. Okay. Welcome here and online. Today I'm going to present this joint work with Rafael and Brian, that are both part of the INET inequality group. I mean, the topic is regards intergenerational poverty persistence in Europe. We think that intergenerational poverty may be a particular salient topic to focus to, in particular, as a component of the more general phenomenon of the transmission of the economic, socio-economic background across generations. And we claim that it has not received enough attention within the literature, and in this work we try to study the topic. As I was saying, much of the literature in economics and sociology has been focused more on the intergenerational mobility in income and in class, in terms of in income, talking about economics, and in class, we're talking about sociology. A lot of work has been done to measure this phenomenon, and also to compare it across methodologies and how to measure it, and also there have been some proposals in terms of comparative studies across countries. That is one of the key interest from our side. Here I mentioned some papers that do this kind of comparative as this comparative approach across countries. The most important one, if we can find it so, is the paper by Korak that treats the comparison across countries of income mobility, but it does a step further to put it in relationship with the intergenerational income mobility in relationship with income inequality, to generate this popular Great Gatsby curve that here I took directly from their paper. As you can see, and as you probably know, the higher is inequality in this set of countries, the higher is the persistence in income. And we're gonna go back to this later in the talk, since, I mean, as I was saying, as you saw in the presentation title, the one of the aims of the paper is to reply to the question whether there is a Great Gatsby curve in poverty or not. Now, what is there in the literature that we have regarding intergenerational poverty persistence? There are some studies that have been they focused on specific aspects and correlates of poverty in childhood and their correlation with the, we're talking about parents' health, education, earnings, class deprivation, and their correlation with the outcomes, with the current outcomes in adulthood. What instead is kind of missing is some studies that directly assess the link between the childhood or parental poverty and the current poverty or poverty in adulthood. And this is exactly the aim of this study. When we go and when we focus to comparative perspective, there is even less literature to comment on, especially because it is not possible to find information on poverty, intergenerational poverty in terms of comparative perspective across countries in studies that focus on the comparative perspective of intergenerational income mobility or intergenerational class mobility. Moreover, we have an exception in this respect. That is the recent preprint and working paper by Zach Parolins and co-authors that using an harmonized panel data for a set of rich countries. I have studied the topic of poverty persistence with some interesting conclusions regarding in particular, the level of poverty persistence in the US that turns out to be very high with respect to the other countries, and with a peculiar focus of the paper on the composition of this effect by certain characteristics. Now, going to summarize what means this motivation and initial part of the presentation, what I'm going to do is to what we have done is to use a specific data source about which I'm gonna talk about it in a few from the next slide on. The USILC dataset and examine the intergenerational transmission of poverty in Europe. The three research questions are listed here, but as you see, there are some dots, meaning that there may be also other ones that can be raised given also the quality and quantity of data that are available. So the first two are kind of linked. So how strong is intergenerational poverty persistence or association in Europe? And the second one, what is the country ranking of this phenomenon? And the third one is whether there is this great Gatsby curve in poverty or not. Now, we start from the description of the data sources to use. We're talking about the USILC that you probably know very well, but specifically we talk about some waves of USILC that are waves in which there is an inclusion of a retrospective module. In particular, this module was included in 2005, 11, and 19. In this module, there are specially designed set of questions about family background and childhood circumstances that are added to the standard questionnaire by USILC. In particular, in this paper, we use the most recent one, most recent wave of 2019 that has some quality, higher quality with respect to the other ones, and especially in terms of the number of countries covered. That is, it equals to 30, all European member states plus Norway, Switzerland, Serbia, but unfortunately there is not UK. And also in terms of the number of questions that are asked to the households. I'm talking about the retrospective questions. These questions are, to be precise from the beginning, rise to respondents asked that are between 25 and 59 years old, and are asked in a specific way that is the following. So they refer to the conditions of father, mother, or the household when they were around 14 years old. So just to clarify to you what we mean by retrospective question in the data. Interestingly, we had to drop a small portion of the sample that is constituted by migrants who moved to the arrival country before age of 16 to exclude any kind of confusion in building this linkage across generations. There are some other works that have covered and they've adopted these data sources. I'm talking about previous waves of USILC with the retrospective module. And as you can see, the paper by Whelan and Brian Nolan in 2013, they used the 2005 wave, and you can see that in that case, the number of countries was equal to 10. The more recent wave paper by Serafino and Tonkin used the 2011 wave of USEC. In that case, the countries were 19. So the advantage of this study is that we're going to have more countries, and also in terms of methodology, it is something that we're going to see in a second. Now I move to the description of the variables basically that we can and the information that we can retrieve from this retrospective module from USEC. The first two variables regard the financial hardship and deprivation in basic needs. Basically, the financial hardship may be built based on a question that regards the financial situation of the household when the respondent was around 14. It has 6 categories, and we categorize here. I mean, it's important to underline that for each of these variables, we aim at obtaining a dichotomous variable that to identify the condition of deprivation in each of these dimensions that I'm gonna present. So for financial hardship, the condition of deprivation is identified by the replies very bad, bad, or moderately bad to the original question. Once we move to the deprivation in basic needs, we have 3 separate questions that arise to household respondents refer to the original household that regard the basic school needs, the daily meal, and the annual 1 week of annual holiday. We basically combine the information from these three questions to get the condition of deprivation in basic needs, parental deprivation in basic needs, basically. We do more or less the same also for education and social class. For education, we have three categories subdivision of education in low, medium, and high attainment, where it's logical we consider low educated as the deprived level of education. And for social class, instead, it is a little bit more complex. We categorize the occupations in terms of ESEC, the European Socioeconomic Classification. We attach also the unemployed and the inactive individuals. So we have in the end 11 categories, and we define the working class as the condition of deprivation in social class that is constituted by this group of individuals, so lower sales and service, lower technical and routine, and unemployed and domestic work. Again, all these questions refer to the condition of mother and father. The same for education. So this is what we got. These are descriptive statistics at the country level of the parental dimensions. I hope you can see the name of the countries. But I mean, the message here is very straightforward. For parental deprivation and hardship, the idea is that there is a certain level of incidence by country, but the variability by country is not that high, apart from Estonia, that may be considered the outlier in terms of parental hardship. While for low education and parental working class, there is, I mean, the situation is a little bit more complicated. In terms of low education, the range is quite higher. I mean, the distance between Germany and Portugal is very large. In Portugal, 80%, more than 80% of the sample, of the parental sample may be considered, maybe defined as low educated, while in Germany, less than around 10%. Interestingly, if we compare these figures with official statistics from Eurostat, around the 80s, and in Portugal, it seems that I mean, in that time, the incidence of low education was very high in the country. Around, I mean, these values are more than 80% of the adults in Portugal in the 80s were maybe considered as low educated. For parental working class, instead, the variability is a little bit less, apart from the outlier that is Switzerland. Let's move on to the another part of the another section of the presentation that regards the poverty measurement. So for the current generation, of course, it's a little bit more straightforward to proceed. Why? Because in New Silk, year by year, you have a lot of information that may be used to build an indicator of poverty, and there could be a lot of different approaches: relative, absolute, multidimensional, whatever. We chose two indicators, dividing between a narrow and a broad indicator. Here, the definition, the labeling depends on the fact that one is nested into the other. So the narrow indicator is nested within the broad one. As we will see later, we do also for the parental poverty. In terms of current poverty, the narrow indicator is just the standard AROP, income-based at risk of poverty. So below 60% of the median income, the household is poor. The broad indicator is the so-called AROPE, so risk of poverty or social exclusion, in which you are considered poor if you are at risk of poverty, severely materially and socially deprived, or in household with very low work intensity. Then we move to the how we build the parental poverty indicators. It is a little bit more complex. Why? Because, I mean, as you now probably have understood, we don't have information on income for the parental generation. So we had to deal with proxies, or at least with other proxies. Better. As I was saying, also in this case, there are two alternatives, one narrow and one broad. For the narrow indicator, we exploit information coming from the first two dimensions that I showed you before, the basic need dimension and the financial hardship. While for the broad indicator, we also include information coming from the parental education and parental social class. Why? Because, I mean, we consider that the two variables of financial hardship and deprivation may be more directly related to the concept of poverty with respect to the working class and the low education. And to show exactly how we define these two indicators, I will ask the help of this graphical tool. So basically, on the left, you will see how we define the narrow indicator of parental poverty, so as the intersection between households that are in the condition of deprivation in terms of basic needs and hardship. So the orange area is the maybe considered as parental poor with our narrowing definition. While, I mean, to this orange area, we add this red area to obtain the broad definition of parental poverty. This red area is composed by the union of these two subsets. Also that are in condition of basic needs or in condition of financial hardship, intersected with the households who are in the situation of low education or in a situation of or maybe considered part of the working class. So basically, if you sum the orange and the red part, you obtain the broad parental poverty indicator. And this is summarized by this. I mean, all these indicators are summarized by this table, in which you get exactly the point that the narrow is the sum of basic needs for the parental generation, the sum of basic needs and hardship, while for the broad, you start again from the narrow indicator and you add some other households. I hope that this is clear. While, I mean, as I was saying, for the current generation, it's a little bit more easier to understand the definition of poverty. And finally, we get to some values, some figures regarding this poverty. Our labeling of narrow and broad is reflected also on the size of this of the incidence of parental and current poverty. Overall, it's expected the narrow poverty is lower with respect to the broad poverty. Also, we can see that there is a certain degree of comparability between the incidence of parental and current poverty, even though the parental poverty is a little bit higher, like more or less two points higher than the current poverty. And another interesting note here to raise is the fact that the sample is different between our narrow indicators and narrow results that we see shortly and the broad results. Why? Because simply as obvious, we for the narrow indicators we deal looking at the parental poverty, we deal only with two retrospective dimensions, as we already said, basic needs and financial hardship. While for the broad parental poverty, we deal with four retrospective variables. The first two plus education and the social class. So, I mean, the higher is the number of variables that you consider, the higher is the probability of missing values in these retrospective questions. And as you see here, the missing the incidence of the part of the sample that is dropped is equal to 9% when we use a narrow approach, and 15% when we use the broad approach. Of course, this dropping may influence the results in the end. But I mean, one thing that could be said is that there has been a much great improvement in terms of the number of these missing values across across the various retrospective modules of USILC, meaning that in 2019 the missings are way less with respect to 2011, or even more in 2005. So it is a process that is improving one wave after wave. But in the end, by the way, we had not a solution to this problem apart from imputing, but of course imputing would have not solved the issue in the end. Now, very quickly, to provide a description of the phenomenon, here we just provide a dichotomization of the two by country of the two conditions of current poverty, in this case measured by Arup. We're talking about the narrow definition, so, and parental poverty, as I was saying, narrow. So we divide, we have a 2x2 matrix, so we have 4 different categories. The more interesting countries here are the countries in blue, that are those ones who have worsened the situation over time, and the countries in yellow, that are the countries that have improved the situation over time. We see that Italy is one of the countries in which situation has worsened. This happened both this is for the broad definition of intergenerational poverty. We see that Italy is stable in these blue categories, jointly with also Denmark, while, for instance, Finland is in this category only for the broad indicators. On the contrary, we have France, Austria that are in the yellow category, these countries that are improving. And we see that they are also there when we use the broad indicators. Now, moving from this very descriptive approach to some point estimates, we explain very quickly the measurement of intergenerational poverty persistence in the paper. We start by estimating a logistic regression, where a simple logistic regression where current poverty is the dependent variable and parental poverty is the predictor. And then we derive the marginal effect of growing poor rather than non-poor on the predicted probability of being currently poor. You know interpretation of the marginal effect, and you know probably also the advantages that you can find using marginal effect with respect to other measures of persistence, or like, for instance, the odds ratios that have some issues in terms of scale and in terms of model comparability. But we'll see later that still we will add the odds ratios as a robustness check, and we'll comment on this later. For all the results, I will, as you have probably understood, I will present figures for narrow and broad intergenerational poverty persistence. And so we start from the row ranking, country ranking. This figure aims to replying at the first two of my research questions that I showed you at the beginning. Here, what you see, what is possible to see from the beginning is the kind of range of the measure from Denmark. It is a negative value of persistence, and Bulgaria, that is a persistence that is almost equal to 0.3. So there is a huge variability across countries in terms of this measure. Among the countries at the top, you may see Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, all countries you may expect at the top in terms of persistence in poverty, while on the contrary, you will see Romania, Bulgaria, Lithuania, and Serbia. What happens when you use broad indicators of poverty, and intergenerational persistence? Overall, what you have is a shift rightward of these figures. If you look at the European average, the marginal effect in terms of broad intergenerational persistence are equal to 0.15, while in the previous one it was around 0.10. So overall, one comment can be we can do to this ranking is that if you try to group the countries in terms of geographical or social welfare regimes, groups, I mean, you can end up with some exceptions. I mean, with respect to standard rankings of that you find in the literature. For instance, if you start from the Scandinavian countries, they are clustered more or less at the top, apart from Norway, that, by the way, especially in especially if you look at Norway in terms of the broad definition of persistence, but as you can see, it has a very large confidence interval. Also, countries that belong to the Baltic or Eastern or Europe in general, you can find it more or less everywhere in the ranking. From Lithuania, it is at the bottom. Estonia is at the top. I mean, in the middle, you will find other ones. The southern Mediterranean countries, such as Italy, Greece, Spain, Portugal, are more or less clustered at the bottom, as you expect. While another group of countries that may be questioned is the group of continental Europe. So we're talking about France, and Switzerland, that you can find it at the top, basically, while Germany is more or less in the middle, and interestingly, Germany and also Netherlands are in the middle, while Belgium is interestingly towards the bottom of the ranking. And more or less, I mean, similar comments may be raised in terms of broad intergenerational poverty. Now, several robustness checks have been are available in the paper that is also available as a working paper of the INET working paper series. Here I list the three of the main. The first one is the use of odds ratios in terms of instead of marginal effects. The second one is an exercise to deal with the issue of the different sample size between narrow and broad intergenerational persistence. And then there are two additional checks controlling with age, controlling by age, and also excluding the remaining part of migrants to see what happens to the estimates. Overall, we can see that the results are not so sensible to these variations that we did in these robustness checks. So we move to the the question whether there is we can talk about a Great Gatsby curve for poverty or not. You probably have heard about the Great Gatsby curve, so there is no need for me to explain that is a relationship that connects mobility and inequality, where intergenerational mobility is lower where inequality is higher, as I showed you at the beginning of the presentation graphically. But I mean, it has created it has become very popular also because it has created a kind of debate, as always happens in our field, especially for scholars that have been trying to study the underlying factors of this relationship, but also other scholars that have tried to falsify this relationship by looking at the use of different measures of inequality of mobility and trying to test whether this relationship survives or not. Now, makes sense probably to think about what happens in terms of Great Gatsby curve at the intergenerational at the linkage between intergenerational poverty persistence and the level of poverty. Probably also it makes sense also more than think about the relationship between inequality and income mobility. Probably the definition of Great Gatsby curve should be changed somehow, because Great Gatsby, I mean, reminds directly of a higher unequal household, and while here we're talking about the lowest part of the distribution. But I mean, here we sketch some of the channels that may be studied to explain the relationship between the condition of poverty and the condition and the persistence in poverty, that are the childhood deprivation, nutrition, the parental stress, social capital, the absence of wealth that may transmit and increase the condition of the household, of the subsequent households, and etc. And we move to the visualization of the results. Another peculiarity of the literature of the Great Gatsby curve is that it's not completely clear whether the correlation should be with the current level of inequality or the past level of inequality. So we propose in this case the correlation between our definition of intergenerational poverty persistence, that we will find both in both the graphs on the vertical axis, and the parental poverty and rural poverty. Overall, the results is that both in terms of narrow intergenerational poverty persistence and in terms of broad intergenerational poverty persistence, the correlation is higher when looking at current poverty and poverty persistence than when looking at parental poverty and poverty persistence. But more or less, I mean, the figures in terms of correlation are the same. And so what can we get from this policy-wise? I mean, given that the correlation between the current poverty and poverty transmission is very high, and I mean, if you look at here, this one is Bulgaria. It seems like an outlier. If you get rid of Bulgaria, the correlation will be even higher. I mean, probably you can end up saying that a policy that implements a reduction in the current level of poverty may also foster a a long run reduction in the transmission of poverty, and so in the persistence of poverty. Then we move quickly to comment on other correlations that we have studied beyond one with the current level of poverty and parental poverty. We also added the correlation between intergenerational poverty persistence and GDP growth and the social expenditure as a percentage of GDP. Here are the results for the narrow indicators, and here are for the broad indicators. As again, these are similar, and you will see that the correlation between poverty persistence and GDP growth is more or less equal to, is more or less absent, while there is a negative expected correlation between the social expenditure and the intergenerational poverty persistence. Finally, we move to the focus on micro determinants of this of the persistence, focusing on the determinants, current determinants basically. We talk about mediators. Here in this graph we compare the results with no mediators that are so the benchmark results, the ones that we already commented on. Again, we're talking about the narrow indicators, and we compare it with the results in which we control for the level of education of the current generation, so of the respondent, for the class, social class level, and for all these two mediators jointly. And basically, what we get is that for some, also in this case, there is a kind of significant variability in the relative importance of each mediators across countries. There are countries like Finland, Netherlands, and Norway, in which the social class has a larger role with respect to education. Countries like Romania and Bulgaria, in which you have a combination of the two effects, while countries like France, Poland, and Cyprus, in which basically it seems that social class has no effect beyond the one of education. And these results may be read also jointly with the results by Zach Parolin with the paper that I already mentioned before. And more or less the same values may be found in terms of the broad indicators. Now, to wrap up, the paper has for sure the advantage of the quality of the data that we use, given this intergenerational or retrospective module of USILC. And that I mean, in 2019 allows the comparison between a significant number of countries, in this case 30 countries, countries that have also particular differences in characteristics and maybe interesting to study. Now, the comment on the results in terms of the estimations of intergenerational persistence is that they are kind of variable by country for sure, and less variable in terms of how you measure it. Since we try to show you the difference between a narrow and broad indicator, there are also the results using other measures like the odds ratios. they are more or less coherent. I mean, in saying that depending on how you measure it, it remains the idea that we are talking about a phenomenon that's a little bit different from with respect to others, since the countries are not easy to group in standard groups as other phenomena. And so now we, as further steps, we aim at for sure validating the use of these retrospective dimensions. Is something that we have a comment that we have got from a lot of commentators and colleagues to validate the fact that we use these retrospective variables to proxy the condition of poverty, and we are working on using a PSID, that is a data source from the US, in which it is possible to have retrospective questions, both retrospective questions on similar characteristics with respect to USIC, and also to have the real information on income, so to compare the replies in terms of income and the replies in terms of and the retrospective replies. And the other point is that of thinking about a different combination of the dimensions, especially the parental ones, but also the current ones. I mean, because at the moment we are exploiting much more the role of income as to measure the current level of poverty, but in future versions or in future works, we are trying to follow the latent class approach, in which we consider many dimensions, both for the parental and the current generation. And finally, another point that I want to raise is that I didn't show anything about what was happening in terms of age cohorts, but also in this, it could be interesting to focus or to develop a study to understand whether this relationship of persistence has been changing over time or not. And after this, I finished. Thank you very much. And know if there is any question here online. Juan, please. Hi, Juan. Cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, Juan.
Yes. Hi. Thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting, and I think it's a very relevant topic to try to get this Great Gatsby curve also for poverty. I have a couple of suggestions. The first one is in terms of, well, you use this narrow poverty and broad poverty, and I don't really know how standard that is in terms of measuring poverty. We are perhaps even more used to relative poverty, which would be the, well, strictly the narrow one. And then in the broad definition, you add both material deprivation and social class, right? Both education and occupation, at least for the current generation, which is easier to measure. I was wondering if you had tried to split these other two components of the broad definition and see, strictly speaking, material, like absolute poverty. That I think that I would be interested in knowing that, how material deprivation or absolute poverty has changed over time. That would be one suggestion. And the other one is about the channels. I think that maybe that part could be highlighted a bit more in terms of policy. Well, I think it is relevant to know which countries have worsened, in which ones this current generation is worse off than the parents, and that there's like a few relevant examples like Italy. But I was wondering if these, especially education, right? Because that is one policy that most governments would think of. Has it worked to expand education? And even within education, is it enough with compulsory education, or now the ones that do not get tertiary education are likely to stay in poverty even as much as their parents were, with lower broad education, or with lower levels of education in percentage across the population? So, and then, yeah, that probably could be presented in terms of focusing on education, and instead of, because that graph in which you see the marginal effect change, maybe you could just take education and present a graph of what is the share that education channels in all of this, and which countries have really made the most out of education in terms of breaking the link of poverty across generations, right? So yeah, those two things, like material deprivation isolated in the study, probably would be interesting, and also the educational channel. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Juan. As always, your comments are always inspiring.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for the comments on education. I mean, I think that given also the results, I mean, probably it's also from your side, these are start from looking at the results. The results speak about the fact that probably education is the main driver, and probably we need to better to focus only on that one, or mainly on that one. So thanks. I will probably take include this kind of analysis. On the first point, I mean, I agree with you. Just to clarify, I mean, do you mean to do to focus on deprivation on the current, and also on the parental, so to obtain intergenerational deprivation, the persistence, the persistence of deprivation only? Is it right?
Yes, that is what I was thinking of.
Okay.
Because then the other poverty, it's is not inequality, but is quite similar to inequality in the sense that it's like, well, you know, below the 60% of the median. So it is like the bad part of inequality isolated, let's say. But then material deprivation is probably even more relevant in terms of welfare. So that could be worth exploring, maybe.
Yeah, the only thing is that the definition of severely materially deprived, I mean, especially in the current one, and follows also because, I mean, I don't know if you got it, but the Arupe definition is another definition coming from official institution. And also there is a institutional defined severely material the deprivation definition, that, I mean, if you compute it, or you get very low figures in terms of deprivation in Europe, like countries that maybe have 2%, 3%.
Yes.
And so maybe the idea could be to
yeah, of course, in Europe, like real material hardship, fortunately, is not a very extended, but even a change from 2 to 1%, it's like it's like halving that. So
yeah, the only possible problem could be that already the confidence intervals are pretty large, maybe.
Oh yeah,
larger.
you're right. Yeah, I get it. You end up with,
I agree.
with very little observations, right?
But I think it makes sense to give a try and have a look for sure.
Or even within the ones thinking about the current generation, like you have these qualitative questions in which you have, I don't know if in the current module there's still this one that was something like to make ends meet. So maybe just take the ones that, not the ones that struggle a little bit, but the ones that struggle a lot. So even if it's not really hardship in the terms of lacking basic needs, you say, okay, the people that really struggle, I don't know how can you get that in both generations. So that could be tricky, but maybe it could, like, give another fine tuning into poverty.
Yeah. But I mean, in general, thank you. It may be for sure helpful for the reader to understanding and to separate the things.
Yeah, actually, I don't. Yeah, in the sense that to mix it with parental social class, I think it's a different dimension, right? That it's englobed in this broad, like maybe, low education doesn't mean that you're poor, strictly speaking, let's say. But anyway, just food for thought.
Okay, is there someone else? Yes, sir.
Yes, I just want to say thank you. It was quite an interesting presentation. You talked about the different channels there, and I was wondering, I'm not familiar with the USOAP data set and what that includes, but I was wondering if there were dimensions that speak to parental mental health and perhaps the child's mental health. My thinking there is that if there's a household that is under a lot of stress due to, say, low socioeconomic class, financial stress, in addition to maybe other psychological intergenerational factors that are playing on the parenting of that child, that can, in some households, depending on other factors, of course, but in some households that can be a recipe for things like child neglect and child abuse, which then also is yet another dimension that kind of causes even more inequality later down the line. Is there an opportunity to take that into consideration as well and figure out where that sits if it runs parallel to things like education, for instance?
I mean, to be honest, if you're talking about retrospective questions, I'm almost sure that there is nothing related specifically to mental health. For sure, there is information on the, not for sure, I need to check, but on the current situation, there should be some questions on mental health, or I mean, proxies of, references to the situation of health more generally, especially also at mental level. But I mean, I think this is a very good suggestion because especially when, as I was saying, we are working on this spin-off project that aims at having this multidimensional approach with the Latin classes to include also other dimensions of mental health. Could be helpful also in explaining some of the results also regarding poverty. So yeah, thank you. I'm gonna have a look at USAID and see better what I can find regarding that. Yes.
Thanks a lot. This is super interesting. I have a question about some of the dimension of the parental, not the social class or the education, but the ones about whether they were eating meat or like the other dimension. So do you think these 2 or 3 dimensions that are not usually used typically with poverty measures, or maybe used, but would you, for example, recommend data producers in the future to always include them in the data because they add more to explaining poverty compared to tradition, like on top of what traditional measures of poverty do usually explain about poverty?
Yeah, I mean, these questions are exactly 3 questions that are part of, while I mean, for current deprivation, they are, I guess, 9. So these are 3 out of 9 of those questions. So you can also directly link the reply to the current situation in terms of holidays and the situation of the parental situation in terms of holidays. So for them, it could have been just a matter of increasing their effort on spending probably some more money to ask in terms of, instead of 3 questions to their parents, refer to their parents 9 questions to make it exactly comparable between the current situation, so to reply to the situation of the current household and the original household. The questions are always the same. Of course, it would have been better to have more. Of course, we're talking in this case about deprivation. These are deprivation related variables, but I mean, deprivation is a dimension of poverty. This is, even though everything may be debated, but for sure is one of those components. Yes. One already. So I guess we are done. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Ignacio, Enrico. Bye bye. I don't know if Mrs. Susan is going to come and close by herself. No.
Usually she comes,
Okay.
but you can close, I mean, last time I closed it.
No. What is it?
You can access it from the map, from the other,
From the other one. I can...
yeah, I think the mouse.
Ah, okay. Should I do and
Yeah, yeah.